There are games people remember because they were great, and then there are games people remember because everyone was talking about them, not because of gameplay, not because of graphics, but because of controversy. For a lot of players in the early 1990s, that game was Night Trap. Before Night Trap, video games were still trying to figure out what they wanted to become. Arcades were huge, consoles were evolving, technology was changing quickly, and companies were searching for the next big thing. One of those next big things was full-motion video, FMV. The idea sounded revolutionary at the time. Real actors, real footage, movie-style presentation. Instead of animated sprites and pixel art, games could suddenly look like television, like cinema, like the future. And Night Trap arrived right in the middle of that excitement. At first glance, it looked unlike almost anything else on consoles. Live-action characters, real environments, actual video clips and a series of traps. For many players, just seeing that technology working at home felt impressive, especially in the early 90s, because games still largely looked like games. Night Trap looked strange, different, almost experimental, and that difference immediately attracted attention. But the gameplay itself was unusual too. You weren't directly controlling a character in the traditional sense. Instead, you monitored security cameras inside a house, watching rooms, switching between feeds, trying to protect a group of teenagers from strange intruders. It felt more like operating a surveillance system than playing a standard game. And that unusual structure added to the fascination. Because even people who didn't necessarily enjoy it hadn't really seen anything like it before. There was a feeling that gaming might be changing, that maybe this FMV style was where the industry was heading. Movies and games blending together, interactive television, interactive cinema. That idea felt futuristic at the time, but Night Trap didn't become famous because of innovation alone. It became famous because of reaction, because suddenly politicians, news outlets and parents started paying attention, and not in a positive way. What's fascinating looking back now is how mild Night Trap actually seems by modern standards. But context matters. In the early 90s, gaming was still largely associated with children. That perception shaped reactions heavily. So when a game featured live-action footage, nighttime settings, teenage characters, and scenes interpreted as threatening or violent, people reacted strongly, especially people who didn't actually play games. That distinction is important. Because much of the outrage surrounding Night Trap came from perception rather than understanding. Clips shown out of context, descriptions exaggerating the content, a growing fear that games were becoming dangerous or inappropriate. And suddenly, Night Trap wasn't just a game anymore. It became part of a national conversation. Government hearings, media debates, public criticism. The game was discussed alongside larger concerns about violence in entertainment. And because it looked more real than traditional games, the reaction intensified. That realism mattered. Pixel art creates distance. FMV reduced that distance. Even though the acting was exaggerated and the presentation was campy, the use of real actors made people uncomfortable in a way animated violence often didn't. And that discomfort became fuel for controversy. There's also something ironic about Night Trap's legacy, because many people who criticized it never actually played it. And many players who did play it remember it very differently, not as horrifying, not as dangerous, but as bizarre. Cheesy, awkward, almost surreal, the acting, the dialogue, the exaggerated performances. Looking back, It feels closer to a strange late-night B-movie than something genuinely shocking. But controversy doesn't always depend on accuracy. It depends on perception. And perception surrounding games in the early 90s was fragile. The industry was growing quickly. Technology was advancing. And adults who didn't grow up with games often didn't understand where things were heading. Night Trap became a symbol of those fears, a symbol of uncertainty about gaming's future, and because of that, its impact became far larger than the game itself. The controversy surrounding Night Trap contributed directly to one of the biggest changes in gaming history. Age ratings, the creation of structured content classification systems, debates around what games should be allowed to show, whether games should be treated differently from films. All of those discussions intensified because of games like Night Trap. That's an enormous legacy for a game many people now remember as campy and strange. And that's what makes it fascinating historically, because its importance doesn't come from gameplay quality. It comes from cultural impact. Night Trap arrived at the exact moment gaming was becoming impossible to ignore. And controversy accelerated that visibility. Parents suddenly paid attention. News outlets suddenly cared. Politicians suddenly saw games as influential media. That changed everything. Because once games entered mainstream debate, the industry could no longer be treated as a niche hobby. It became part of larger cultural discussions. And Night Trap sat right in the center of that moment. There's also something strangely admirable about how experimental it was. Even if the gameplay wasn't perfect, even if the technology was limited, it tried something different, something ambitious. FMV Games represented an industry searching for new possibilities, trying to figure out how far interactivity could go. And while FMV eventually became more of a niche experiment than the future of gaming, it still represents an important moment in gaming history. A moment where developers genuinely believed games and film might fully merge. Night Trap captured that ambition, even if imperfectly. Looking back now, it's impossible not to see the contrast between reaction then and reaction now. Modern games feature levels of realism, violence, storytelling, and emotional intensity that early 90s audiences couldn't have imagined. Compared to modern standards, Night Trap feels almost innocent. But that contrast is exactly why it's important historically. Because it shows how much gaming changed, how public perception evolved, how entertainment boundaries shifted. At the time, Night Trap represented fear of where gaming might go. Now it represents how early that fear arrived, and how misunderstood gaming often was. That misunderstanding helped shape the industry, because once controversy began, the gaming world had to adapt. Publishers became more cautious, ratings became standard, discussions around content became unavoidable. Games stopped being treated purely as toys, and that shift mattered enormously. In a strange way, Night Trap helped gaming grow up, not through its quality, but through the reaction surrounding it. That reaction forced the industry into larger cultural conversations. And once that happened, gaming became harder to dismiss, because controversy creates visibility. Visibility creates attention, and attention changes perception. That's why Night Trap still gets discussed decades later. Not because it was one of the greatest games ever made, but because it became part of gaming history itself, a symbol of an era where gaming felt uncertain, experimental, dangerous to some people, exciting to others, an era where the future of the medium wasn't fully understood yet. Night Trap captured all of that. The ambition, the awkwardness, the fear, the fascination. And because of that, its legacy became far bigger than anyone could have predicted. Some games entertain, some games innovate, and some games accidentally become cultural flashpoints. Night Trap did exactly that. And once the controversy started, gaming was never viewed quite the same way again.